If I'm late, someone dies. The words left Naomi Carter's lips steady, almost too calm for the chaos unfolding around her. But the officer standing beside her car didn't hear urgency. He heard defiance, and his hand hovered near his radio as the late afternoon sun burned against the asphalt, heat rising in slow waves from the pavement while traffic crawled past in uneasy silence, drivers craning their necks to watch, phones already lifting into the air, because something about this moment felt off, like a story about to turn, but no one knew how. Not yet. Not even the man in uniform who tapped twice against her window before she had stepped out. Not even Naomi herself as she stood there now in a simple navy dress, her posture straight despite the tension coiling in the air, her eyes fixed not on the officer, but on the passenger seat behind her where a small insulated container sat buckled in. A soft mechanical sound slipping through the crack of the door, faint at first, then sharper, more deliberate. A steady beep that didn't belong to traffic or sirens or anything ordinary. But the officer ignored it, his voice cutting through the heat. Firm, practiced, license and registration. As if this were routine, as if this were just another stop, another face, another moment he could control. But Naomi didn't move right away, not because she was refusing, but because she was listening, counting. The sound in her car marking seconds that mattered more than anything he could understand. And when she finally turned her head slightly, the light caught her expression, not fear, not anger, but something heavier, something measured, like she was carrying a truth no one else could see. "Officer," she said quietly, her voice even, almost gentle, "you're making a mistake." And for a brief second, something flickered in his eyes, not doubt, not yet, but irritation sharpened by the presence of an audience, by the awareness that people were watching, recording, waiting for something to happen. Because moments like this always became something bigger, always turned into something more, and he wasn't about to lose control of it. Not here, not in front of everyone. So he stepped closer, the edge of authority tightening in his tone. "Ma'am, I need you to cooperate." And still, that sound continued behind her, the quiet, relentless beep that seemed to press against the edges of the moment, unnoticed by everyone except the one person who understood exactly what it meant. Naomi's fingers tightening slightly at her side, her breath measured, controlled, because every second stretched thinner now, every second pulling something closer, something inevitable, and far above the city, where the sky hung pale and endless. Something else had already begun to move. Naomi's gaze did not shift from the passenger seat, even as the officer's patience thinned, because the sound inside the car was no longer faint. It was sharper now, more urgent, each beep cutting through the heavy air like a quiet warning that only she could hear. And in her mind the numbers were already falling into place, minutes shrinking into seconds, a window closing that no one here even knew existed. While behind the officer a small crowd had formed along the sidewalk, some standing still, others whispering, the glow of phone screens reflecting off windshields and sunglasses, capturing every movement as if this were already a story worth telling. But for Naomi this was not a story, it was a deadline, and somewhere across the city, inside a sterile hospital room filled with steady lights and quiet machines, someone was waiting without knowing how close they were to running out of time. And that thought pressed against her chest harder than anything the officer could say. "I just need to go," she said, her voice still calm but firmer now, as if she was holding back something larger than fear, something heavier than frustration. But the officer shook his head, misunderstanding completely, interpreting her urgency as resistance, as another excuse he had heard too many times before, and he took a step closer, his presence filling the space between them, narrowing the world down to authority and compliance. "Ma'am, you are not going anywhere until I say so," he replied, each word measured, final, and for a brief moment the world seemed to slow, the sunlight reflecting off the hood of the car, the faint hum of engines idling nearby, the distant sound of a siren that had nothing to do with them, and beneath it all that steady, relentless beeping, now loud enough that a few people in the crowd began to notice, their expressions shifting slightly, curiosity turning into something else, something uneasy, but still no one understood, not fully, not yet, and Naomi's hand lifted slightly, not in defiance, but in quiet restraint. as if she was choosing her next words with care. Because explaining would take time, and time was the one thing she did not have. "There is something in that car that cannot wait," she said, her eyes finally meeting his, steady and unflinching. And for the first time, there was something in her tone that did not ask for permission. It stated a fact. But the officer's jaw tightened, the pressure of being watched settling into his posture, pushing him further into the role he believed he had to hold. And he reached toward his radio, fingers brushing against it as if preparing to escalate, while the beeping continued, louder now, more insistent, and far above them. Beyond the line of buildings and traffic lights, a faint vibration began to ripple through the sky, too distant to recognize yet, but moving closer with every passing second. The officer's fingers hovered over his radio but did not press it yet, as if some instinct held him back, something subtle and unspoken that did not match the situation he thought he was controlling. And Naomi saw it, that flicker of hesitation, but she also heard the beeping climb in urgency, faster now, tighter, each pulse compressing the air around her like an invisible clock closing in. And her mind drifted for just a second to the sterile hallway she had walked through less than 20 minutes ago, the fluorescent lights overhead, the quiet tension in every nurse's step, the doctor who had looked at her not with doubt, but with urgency, placing the sealed container into her hands as if it carried more than medicine, as if it carried a final chance. And she had nodded, not because she needed instructions, but because she understood what was at stake. And now that understanding stood here with her, trapped between a uniform and a misunderstanding. While the officer finally lifted the radio, his voice controlled but sharper now, requesting a check. Routine, procedural, nothing about it hinting at the gravity of the moment. And the reply came back with static, fragmented, incomplete, as if the system itself had not yet caught up to what was unfolding. And around them the crowd shifted again, a murmur spreading as more people noticed the sound from the car, a few stepping closer, not interfering, just drawn by something they could not name. While Naomi's breathing remained steady, her posture unchanged, but inside her thoughts were narrowing, focusing, calculating the distance to the hospital, the traffic patterns, the time already lost, and the time she could not afford to lose. "You do not understand," she said softly, not as an accusation but as a truth. And for a moment the officer looked at her, really looked, as if trying to place something about her that did not fit his expectations, her calm, her precision, the absence of panic where panic should have been. And then it happened, not loud, not dramatic, just a subtle shift. The radio in his hand crackled again, but this time the tone was different, sharper, urgent in a way that cut through everything else. "Unit on Maple and 3rd, confirm status immediately," the voice said, and before he could respond another voice layered over it. "Higher priority, unmistakable. Do not detain Naomi Carter." And the officer froze, not completely, but enough for the moment to fracture, his authority slipping just a fraction as the name hung in the air. Repeated again, clearer now. "Repeat. Do not detain Naomi Carter." And the crowd fell quieter, as if the sound itself carried weight they could feel even without understanding. While Naomi closed her eyes for the briefest second, not in relief, not yet, but in recognition that something had finally reached beyond this street, beyond this misunderstanding, and was now moving toward them with a force no one here could stop. And above them the distant vibration in the sky deepened, no longer faint, no longer ignorable, growing closer with every passing second. The officer's grip on the radio tightened as the command echoed again, clearer now, louder, layered with a tone that did not invite debate. "Do not detain Naomi Carter." And the words seemed to hang in the heat like something heavy enough to shift the entire moment, his posture changing just slightly, not enough for the crowd to notice at first, but enough for Naomi to see. That subtle recalibration when certainty begins to fracture. And the beeping from the car cut through again, sharper, faster. No longer background noise but a presence, insistent, unavoidable. While the officer's eyes flicked toward the open door for the first time, really hearing it, really noticing that something inside that vehicle did not belong to an ordinary stop. And he lowered the radio halfway, caught between protocol and something he did not yet understand. "Dispatch, confirm," he said, but his voice lacked the same firmness it had seconds ago. And the reply did not come from dispatch alone this time. It came layered, overridden, a higher channel forcing through. Unit, you are instructed to release Naomi Carter immediately. And a pause followed, just long enough for the weight of those words to settle, just long enough for the crowd to feel the shift without knowing why. A ripple of whispers spreading through the small gathering, phones tilting closer, zooming in, capturing the hesitation, the change, the moment authority began to bend. And Naomi stood exactly where she had been, not moving forward, not stepping back, her focus still anchored to the steady, relentless countdown behind her. Because even as the situation shifted, the time had not. The beeping continued. Faster now. Tighter, each pulse pressing against her awareness like a ticking edge, and she inhaled slowly, grounding herself, because this was not over yet, not until she was back on the road, not until the distance between her and that hospital began to close again, and above them the sound that had once been distant now grew unmistakable, the low, rhythmic thunder of rotor blades cutting through the sky, not a passing helicopter, not a coincidence, but something deliberate, something approaching with purpose, and heads began to tilt upward, eyes narrowing against the light as the source came into view, dark against the pale sky, descending with controlled precision, and the officer followed their gaze for a fraction of a second before looking back at Naomi, something unspoken passing through his expression now, something closer to realization than doubt, and the radio in his hand crackled once more, final, unmistakable. This is not a request. The voice said, calm but absolute. You are interfering with a federal operation. And that was the moment everything shifted completely, not with noise, not with force, but with understanding, as the lines between what he thought this was and what it truly was finally broke apart, leaving him standing in the middle of something far bigger than he had ever expected. The officer did not speak right away. His voice caught somewhere between training and realization, and for the first time since the stop began, he stepped back instead of forward, creating a small but undeniable space between himself and Naomi, while the rotor noise above deepened into a steady, controlled thunder that pressed down over the street, flattening conversations, silencing whispers, pulling every eye upward as the aircraft lowered with precision that felt intentional, exact, not rushed, not chaotic, just inevitable. And the wind from it stirred loose papers, tugged at clothing, brushed against Naomi's hair as she remained still, grounded in a moment that was no longer about her alone, while the beeping inside the car accelerated again, sharper now, more urgent, and she turned slightly toward it, her body already preparing to move even before permission was given. Because in her mind the timeline had not changed, only the obstacles had, and behind her the crowd had fallen into a strange quiet, phones still raised but voices gone, as if everyone understood without explanation that this was no longer something ordinary. And the officer glanced once more at his radio, then at Naomi, and something in his expression softened, not weakness, not fear, but the first trace of accountability, the awareness that he had been standing in the way of something critical, something that had nothing to do with suspicion or control, and everything to do with time. Ma'am, he said, his tone lower now, stripped of its earlier edge. You are free to go. The words simple but carrying a weight that shifted the entire moment. And Naomi did not hesitate. She moved immediately, stepping past him with purpose, opening the car door fully as the beeping filled the air around her, louder now, unmistakable. And she reached for the secured container with careful hands, lifting it just enough to check the display, her eyes scanning the numbers with practiced focus, confirming what she already knew, that every second mattered, that every delay had cost something she could not get back. And for a brief second she closed her eyes, steadying herself, not from fear, but from the precision of what came next. And when she opened them again, there was no tension left in her expression, only clarity, only direction. And behind her the officer stood still, watching, no longer the center of the moment, no longer in control of it, just a witness now. As the situation moved beyond him, beyond the street, beyond anything he could correct with words alone, and as Naomi slid back into the driver's seat, the engine still running, the container secured beside her, the sound of the rotor above aligned with the rhythm of the beeping inside. two forces moving in parallel, closing in on the same point in time. And as her hands settled on the wheel, the path ahead no longer blocked. The moment held for just a fraction longer before everything began to move again. The engine responded instantly beneath Naomi's hands, a low steady hum rising as she pressed her foot down, the car easing forward at first, and then gathering speed, slipping out from the space where time had been stolen from her. While behind her the officer remained still, the weight of the moment settling into his posture as the rotor wash from above continued to ripple across the street, flattening the air, pushing loose dust and paper along the pavement like a quiet reminder that something far larger had just passed through. And Naomi did not look back, not once. Her focus locked ahead as traffic parted. Slowly, uncertain drivers shifting lanes as the sound of the aircraft overhead guided them without words. And inside the car the beeping continued. Faster now. Tighter. The numbers on the small display ticking down with precise indifference. 312, 311, 310. And she adjusted her grip on the wheel, her movements controlled, efficient. Every turn calculated as she navigated through the city streets she knew well enough to move through without hesitation. The late afternoon light stretching long across the road, reflecting off glass and metal, turning everything into a blur of motion and color, but none of it reached her focus, because in her mind there was only distance and time, nothing else. And for a brief moment her thoughts returned to the hospital again, to the quiet urgency in that room, to the way the medical staff had stepped aside when she walked in, not questioning, not doubting, just recognizing. Because what she carried was not just another task, it was responsibility, the kind that did not allow for hesitation. And now every second she gained back mattered, every block she cleared, every signal she timed just right. And above her the aircraft did not leave. It stayed in motion, tracking, matching her path at a controlled distance, its presence both a shadow and a signal, guiding the space around her, ensuring that nothing slowed her down again. And as she approached an intersection, the light shifted just before she reached it, green holding longer than it should have, a subtle coordination that did not need explanation, and she moved through without stopping, the rhythm of the city bending just slightly around her path. While inside the car the beeping reached a sharper pitch, more urgent, more insistent. 221, 220, and Naomi exhaled slowly, steadying herself, because she could feel the margin narrowing now. The difference between arriving and being too late shrinking with every second, and yet her expression did not change. Her posture did not break, because panic would not help. Fear would not move the road any faster. Only precision would, only control. And as the hospital building finally came into view in the distance, its glass front, catching the last light of the afternoon, something inside her settled, not relief, not yet, but alignment. The sense that everything was converging toward a single point. And as she accelerated slightly, closing that final stretch, the beeping inside the car continued to count down, steady, relentless, carrying the weight of everything that depended on what happened next. The hospital entrance rushed closer, glass doors reflecting the fading light as Naomi turned sharply into the drop-off lane, tires rolling to a precise stop before the car had fully settled, and she was already moving. The door opening, her hand reaching for the container with practiced care as the beeping surged into a rapid, urgent rhythm, 114, 113, 112. And the world outside seemed to narrow into a corridor of motion, nurses appearing at the entrance as if they had been waiting there, eyes locking onto the container, onto her, not asking questions, not hesitating, just moving with her as she stepped forward, her pace quick but controlled, the sound of her shoes against the pavement sharp in the quiet urgency of the moment, while above, the rotor noise began to fade slightly, holding position but no longer descending, as if its role had shifted from intervention to witness. And Naomi crossed the threshold into the hospital, the air inside cooler, sterile, the scent of antiseptic cutting through the lingering heat of the street, and everything became faster now, more focused, the hallway lights stretching ahead, staff stepping aside, clearing a path that had already been decided before she arrived, because they knew what was coming, they knew what was at stake, and the container never left her hands, not even for a second, until she reached the secured doors at the end of the corridor, where a doctor stood waiting, his expression tight but steady, his hand already extended, and for a fraction of a second, time seemed to pause, not in reality, but in perception, the beeping reaching its sharpest edge, 032, 031, and Naomi met his eyes, not with relief, not yet, but with certainty, because this was the point everything had been moving toward, and she placed the container into his hands. With exact precision, no wasted motion, no hesitation, and the moment it left her grip, something shifted, not outwardly, not dramatically, but internally, like a line had been crossed, a responsibility transferred, and the doctor turned immediately, disappearing through the secured doors without another word, the sound of the beeping fading as it moved away from her, and Naomi stood there, her hands now empty, her breathing steady but deeper, as the hallway returned to its quiet rhythm around her, the urgency still present but no longer centered on her, and behind her, through the glass entrance far in the distance, the last echo of the rotor blades drifted across the sky, softer now, receding, as if the moment itself was closing, but not yet finished, not until what happened behind those doors became known. Naomi did not follow the doctor through the secured doors. She remained where she stood, her hands still slightly lifted as if they remembered the weight that had just left them, and for a moment the world around her felt suspended, the hallway quieter now, the urgency shifting away from her and into the room beyond, where decisions and precision would carry what she had delivered to its final purpose. And she inhaled slowly, her breath deeper now, steadier, as the tension that had held her together began to loosen, not completely, not yet, but enough for her to feel the space around her again, the cool air against her skin, the distant hum of machines, the soft footsteps of staff moving with controlled focus. And then the doors opened again, not fully, just enough for a nurse to step out, her expression unreadable at first, composed in the way professionals learn to be. But her eyes lingered on Naomi for a fraction longer than necessary, and that was enough to signal that something had changed, something had shifted in the room beyond, and Naomi straightened slightly, not stepping forward, not asking, just waiting, because she understood that some outcomes arrived in silence before they were spoken, and seconds passed, measured not by sound now, but by the stillness itself, until the doctor returned, his movements slower than before, his shoulders less rigid, and he stopped a few feet in front of her, meeting her gaze with something that had not been there earlier, not urgency, not pressure, but acknowledgement. "We needed that," he said quietly, the words simple but carrying more than explanation, and Naomi nodded once, a small motion, controlled, as if she had already accepted that outcome long before she arrived. Because for her the moment had never been about recognition, it had always been about timing, about reaching that door. Before the numbers ran out, and behind the doctor, through the narrow opening, a glimpse of the room showed movement that was no longer frantic, no longer urgent, but coordinated, steady, as if the balance had been restored, and Naomi exhaled again, slower this time, the last trace of tension leaving her shoulders, while outside the building the distant sound of the aircraft continued to fade, its presence no longer needed, its purpose complete, and for a brief second she allowed herself to look back toward the entrance, toward the world she had just moved through, the street, the officer, the moment that could have gone another way, and she did not smile, she did not linger on it, because what mattered had already been decided in the seconds no one else had seen, and as she turned back toward the quiet hallway, the weight of everything settled into something simpler, something quieter, the kind of silence that follows when the right thing is done and nothing more needs to be said. Naomi remained in the hallway a moment longer, not because she needed to, but because something in the stillness asked her to stay, to let the weight of what had just happened settle without interruption, and the hospital around her continued its quiet rhythm, nurses moving with purpose, distant monitors humming softly, the world returning to its normal pace as if the urgency that had just passed through had never existed. But she knew it had. She had felt every second of it, carried it, measured it, and now that it was over, there was nothing left to prove, nothing left to explain, and she turned slowly toward the exit, her steps unhurried now, the tension gone from her shoulders, replaced by something steadier, something grounded, and as she moved down the corridor, people passed her without knowing, without realizing what had just depended on the minutes she had fought to protect. And that was how it always was. The most important moments rarely announced themselves. They happened quietly, carried by people who did not stop to be seen. And as she reached the glass doors at the entrance, the late afternoon light met her again. Softer now, stretching long across the pavement, the air outside calmer, the street no longer crowded, the onlookers gone, leaving behind only the faint traces of what had been. And her car still sat where she had left it, engine off now, silent, as if it too had completed its role, and she paused beside it for just a second, her hand resting lightly on the door, her reflection faint in the glass, steady, composed, unchanged on the surface, but carrying something deeper beneath it, something shaped by the choices she had made in the seconds that mattered most. And in the distance the sky was clear again, the sound of the aircraft completely gone, leaving nothing but open space where it had once hovered. And Naomi looked forward, not back, because there was nothing behind her that needed revisiting, no anger, no regret, only a moment that had passed and a decision that had held. And she opened the car door, slid into the seat, and for a brief second she simply sat there, hands resting lightly on the wheel, breathing evenly, as if marking the quiet end of something that had never needed recognition. And then she started the engine, the sound low and steady, and pulled away from the hospital, merging back into the flow of the city where no one knew her name, where no one needed to, and the road stretched ahead in calm silence, carrying her forward, while somewhere behind those doors, a life continued because she had not stopped when it mattered, and that truth did not need to be spoken. It simply remained, quiet and certain, like the kind of justice that does not announce itself but can be felt long after the moment has passed.